Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Germany, shoring up support from Berlin for his country's fight against Russia. The German chancellor says he and Zelensky have agreed to the joint production of long-range missiles inside Ukraine. The Kremlin previously said allowing Ukraine to use those weapons against Russia is, quote, dangerous. All this comes as Ukraine says it struck Russian drone facilities right near Moscow. Let's go live right now to CNN senior international correspondent Fred Pleitgen, who's joining us from Berlin. Fred, are the Europeans going to step in and give Ukraine more arms, the arms that Ukraine says it desperately needs?
Well, it certainly seems as though, Wolf, that the Europeans are stepping up as the Trump administration might be scaling back things, if you will, at least so far. The Germans announcing a pretty large support package, actually, for the Ukrainians. Not all that in military aid, some other aid as well, of about 5 billion euros. So that is certainly significant. And a lot of that is that combined arms production that we were just talking about. It was quite interesting because many had thought that the Germans were going to announce that they were going to give longer-range cruise missiles called the Taurus to the Ukrainians. That was not announced today. Instead, this combined arms production for what the Germans call longer-range weapons. Now, there's some interesting points that we picked up from the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who spoke about this. And later, the Defense Ministry came out and said that the first batch of these weapons would already be with the Ukrainian military in a matter of weeks, that no additional training was necessary, and that before the end of the year, the Ukrainians would have a significant number of these weapons. So it certainly seems as though the Germans and the Ukrainians combined looking to scale up the production of these arms very quickly. The Germans also announcing there's going to be new munitions packages for the Ukrainians as well. As the Ukrainians, Wolf, also trying to take that longer distance combat to the Russians, one of the things that happened overnight in Russia is that the Ukrainians say that they targeted several drone-producing facilities in the area around Moscow. Of course, one thing that we have seen a lot of over the past couple of days is very large, sustained drone attacks by the Russians against Ukrainian cities. So certainly it seems as though overnight the Ukrainians are saying that they have now struck back, and it seems as though they might be doing a lot more of that if these aid packages from the Germans and that combined weapons production really matures the way that both Zelensky and Friedrich Merz said earlier today.
It certainly looks like this war is about to heat up big time. Fred Pleitgen in Berlin for us. Thank you very much. Let's discuss this and more with retired U.S. four-star Army General Stanley McChrystal. He's the former commander of all U.S. forces in Afghanistan and the author of a brand new book. There you see the cover, On Character, Choices That Define a Life. Ukraine's allies, General McChrystal, as you well know, and thank you for writing this important book. It's really got a lot of insight into what's going on. How the removing of these restrictions on the allies, the pro-Ukrainian allies, like Germany, for example, they removed all these restrictions, allowing Ukraine's military to now target Russian sites, Russian military sites, and other sites inside Moscow, including right near inside Russia, including right near Moscow. What do you make of this?
Well, what it seems they're trying to do is raise the cost for Russia and for Putin in particular to continue the fight. And so by giving Ukraine the weapons that they feel they need to actually strike inside Russia effectively and whenever they need to, I think it increases the likelihood that Russia at some point hits a point where the cost isn't worth it.
And just to be precise, until now, the European allies told the Ukrainians, you can have these weapons, but use them against Russian targets who are moving in Ukraine, but you can't target sites inside Russia itself, out of fear that that would really escalate this war.
And U.S. aid over the years has also been limited with restrictions and what we would give. There was an argument at one point that we were giving Ukraine enough not to lose, but not enough to actually win. And this could be moving closer to giving them the ability to actually defend their country.
Russia has openly threatened, as you probably know, for a long time, that lifting these restrictions on long-range weapons would mean war with NATO from their point. Russian war with NATO allies. How much credibility do you put on that threat?
I personally don't put a lot on that threat. I think that Russia is a greater threat to NATO long-term, in fact, if they succeed in Ukraine. So it will cost less and be less risky for NATO to stand up to Putin now.
You think they will?
I think that they will. I am hopeful that the United States will step in line with them.
and support Ukraine fully and let them try to win this war and prevent Russia taking over all of Ukraine.
And partner with our NATO allies so that we have an unbroken line.
A lot of talk, but so far no action from President Trump when it comes to punishing Russia. Vladimir Putin vowed last week to send President Trump a framework for a ceasefire with Ukraine. Trump is still waiting for it. He says Putin is, quote, playing with fire and that he's considering new sanctions. In Russia, they don't sound too worried about those threats.
And suddenly, Trump says terrible things. Trump is going back somewhere to the 19th century. Trump suddenly says, no, we're not going to do this anymore. I am somehow seriously worried about his life and health.
Pressure is mounting on the Russians to agree to a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Germany's new chancellor declaring there are no longer any restrictions on the use of long-range Western missiles by Ukraine. The Kremlin calling that position dangerous. Right now, Ukraine's president is in Berlin to meet with the chancellor. And that's where CNN's Sebastian Shukla is. Good morning, Sebastian. Thanks for being with us.
Morning.
I wanted to talk about this because we're seeing European nations feel like they have to step up as the U.S. kind of withdraws or does a lot of finger wagging about how they protect Europe and get involved in its security. How has this new chancellor approached things differently?
Well, Uri, Chancellor Merz has taken a very different line to Chancellor Scholz, who was his predecessor. And in the 21 days that he has been Chancellor, we've seen a big change in the way that Germany, and particularly Merz, is trying to position this country and its support of Ukraine. The thing to remember in all of this is that Germany has been, for a long time, one of Ukraine's most ardent supporters. It's the second most in terms of overall aid delivered. That could be militarily, humanitarian, and the others. But it's also the second most after the United States in terms of military aid total after the US. And today, that's what we're going to start to hear from the Chancellor with President Zelensky about the potential delivery of these lethal long-range weapons called the Taurus missiles, which will trump anything else that is able and has been deployed and delivered by the US and the Brits in terms of being able to strike targets deep into Russia. So this is an important meeting, Audie, and a very significant one when it comes to Germany's positioning both within NATO and for its support of Ukraine.
And to be clear, it's not just any missile system, right? I mean, it is considered possibly the best in the world.
Yeah, that's right. It's a Swedish-German developed missile system. It's known as Taurus, and it's able to reach targets deep inside Russia. We're talking about being able to launch these things to be able to hit the Russian capital or other strategic targets, perhaps further south. That famous bridge that bridges the illegally annexed peninsula of Crimea to the Russian mainland. It's known as the Kerch Bridge. It's come under attack various times by Ukrainians' naval forces. So we're talking about extending this fight to take it more to the Russian mainland, which is something that President Zelensky has said he's wanted to do for quite some time, to bring the war home to Russians. If they agree, this will be a pretty major and significant step towards it, but I caveat the but here, it's not agreed yet. There are various difficulties here in Germany about the proposal to get that signed off that Merz is fighting within his own party and coalition too, Audie.